Hi, I'm Elaine, and I'm very grateful that you've chosen to give up your time to listen to me speak rubbish. More specifically, about the problem of littering and what we can do about it within our communities. But first, let me tell you a little bit about myself. I grew up in Florida, and I went to university in Pennsylvania, where I studied archaeology as an undergraduate. While there, I had the opportunity to do a year abroad at the University of Bristol, and I fell in love with the city and the university's Department of Archaeology. I returned to do a master's, stuck around to complete a PhD, and I managed to successfully defend my dissertation and get married in the same month. So this sounds like it should be a happy ending, but I graduated at the tail end of the last recession. Finding jobs in archaeology and heritage is challenging in the best of circumstances, and these were definitely not the best of circumstances. Instead, I ended up becoming a postdoctoral researcher, working on projects dealing with behavior change and how to encourage people to adopt retrofitting measures to make their homes more energy efficient. And at this point, you're probably wondering how all of this connects to litter. Well, I like to joke that it was my background as an archaeologist that got me interested in rubbish. After all, what are artifacts but litter from the past? Or, looking at it from another perspective, what is litter but future archaeological remains? And perhaps that's why I noticed every piece of rubbish on my daily commute between my house and the local train station. I found myself growing angrier and angrier until I had the incredible epiphany that I had a choice. I could either continue to complain about it, or I could pick up the rubbish myself. I chose the second option, and I roped my husband into collecting and recording data about the litter we found on the streets of Chippenham. We soon built a group of like-minded people and formed an organization called Off the Ground. Like thousands of other people across the country, we pick up rubbish on a regular basis and have collected hundreds of bags of litter over the past 8 years. So I could talk to you today about how to run a community cleanup. It's easier than you might think, and community litter picks are a great gateway to get people interested in environmental issues and take the first step towards bigger environmental actions. However, I suspect many of you are already doing this. And I think it's important to recognize that litter picks alone do not solve the problem of littering. If they were a solution, the country would not still have a litter problem. So we're not going to discuss this today. In addition to picking up litter, working as a researcher who was studying how behavior change techniques could be used to benefit the environment began to impact my perspective. For example, a lot of the academic literature about how to reduce energy use or encourage water conservation could be applied to stopping litter before it starts. To change behavior, we could look at why people litter in the first place. When running a community cleanup, the comment I probably hear most often is, "I just don't understand why people litter." Closely followed by, "Litterers are lazy," "Litterers are selfish," "Litterers are thoughtless." While I have sometimes been known to mutter even ruder things under my breath about those who leave litter, I've identified over 20 reasons for littering. Ranging from the slightly ridiculous but quite common "littering makes a job for someone" to the more complex societal problems of homelessness and addiction. Research likewise shows that littering tends to be about context. Someone who wouldn't dream of littering while on the high street will leave their rubbish behind at a festival because they see other people doing the same thing. Basically, there's a lot of nuance to untangle when it comes to behavior change. This includes recognizing that there is no one weird trick or perfect intervention that will prevent litter. But unfortunately, we don't have time to get into this today either. What you might have guessed so far is that I could talk rubbish with you all day. This is why I have these notes to try to keep me on track and from going off on a tangent. And what I am going to talk about briefly is a series of blog posts I wrote called Putting Litter First, which does more or less what it says on the tin. The goal is to put litter first so we can see the last of it. I think we can all agree that there are a lot of problems facing the planet. And wouldn't it be great to remove one issue that we cause ourselves so we can focus on everything else? And shouldn't the ultimate goal be creating clean communities where litter picks are no longer needed? To do this, I think it's necessary to find a middle ground. Often, it seems like there's a false choice presented. Those who are working to stop litter can either run a litter pick, or they can lobby the government for higher fines or for programs like the Deposit Return Scheme. The problem with this is that most of us are already doing the first bit. As I've said, we've been picking up litter from Chippenham for 8 years without a noticeable decrease in the amount of rubbish found. On the other hand, waiting for the government to get its act together with higher fines, sensible enforcement, and a proper deposit return scheme, well, that feels like an exercise in futility. We can and we certainly should campaign for these changes, but at the same time, we must recognize that the outcome is outside of our control. Instead, I think there are things that can be done at the community level if enough people are willing to step forward to help make it happen. Before I get into how we can potentially do this, I want to explain a little about the thought process that went into it. First, throughout the pandemic and lockdowns, I had a lot of people find the Off the Ground website or social media channels and get in touch to talk trash. What came across to me from these discussions is that a lot of tools for tackling litter already exist. However, these tools aren't being used because they're not necessarily getting into the right hands. Second, I run my own business, and networking is a big part of this. Now, what I mean by networking might not be what you're thinking. It tends to get a bad rap as something involving a lot of small talk, schmoozing, and trying to make a sale. However, how I practice it is by listening and trying to make connections between people. And it's this idea of connection that's at the heart of putting litter first, because what I've found is that when I speak to the right person, it's like I'm no longer pushing against a locked door. Instead, it's thrown open and things get a lot easier. It's a bit of a cliche to say it's not what we know, it's who we know. But it's cliche for a reason. There is a great deal of truth in this statement. So I'm asking you to talk rubbish as well. Who do you know who can help amplify both the message and the actions needed to tackle litter? Who do you know who could potentially help connect you to others? Who do you know who could be an anti-litter champion? Beyond getting existing tools into the hands of those who can make a difference, it's equally important that we understand what the potential barriers are, not so that we give up, but so that we have a better understanding of what we're working with. We don't have time to run through what this would look like in practice for everyone listed here, but as an example, do you know anyone who works for a cinema or theater, as bus or train staff, or maybe those who are involved with sports teams or who work for stadiums or sports grounds? The reason I highlight these as places to start in the battle against litter is that these are places where people are known to leave rubbish behind at their seats, expecting someone else to clean up after them. Changing this mindset that it's somebody else's job to dispose of rubbish is absolutely necessary to get the ball rolling and begin to change behavior. But to do so, we need to start from the ground up and find out how these spaces view rubbish. Maybe they don't think it's a problem. Maybe there are things that have been tried in the past. What happened? Can the interventions be improved? What are the barriers to embedding a constant and consistent message to encourage customers to use a bin, something that can be done year in and year out? Staying curious and listening to what's said, as well as what's not mentioned, are all part of the process. It's much easier to develop potential behavior change interventions once the full picture is known, and it's much easier to encourage buy-in from organizations if their opinion has been sought and taken into account. Something else that forms part of the foundation of stopping litter before it starts is education. So, do you know parents, teachers, or local counselors? Are they aware of the Eco Schools program? A few years ago, I had a meeting with someone who will remain nameless, but he was rather high up in the management of my town. He introduced himself by saying that he had been dealing with litter for 30 years, and he more or less knew everything there was to know. When I mentioned the importance of education, he insisted there was no way the council could afford to send anyone into schools to speak to children about not littering, which wasn't what I was going to discuss. Instead, I introduced him to Eco Schools, which he had never heard of. It's the largest environmental education program in the world, with 19 million students enrolled in it across 68 countries. Although it's overseen by Keep Britain Tidy in the UK, it covers many more environmental topics than just litter, and what I like about it is that it ties into the curriculum of whatever country it's in. There is no need to pay someone to go into a school. That being said, there are things needed for it to be successfully deployed, and I'm happy to discuss this more outside of this session, but I really want to highlight that this is something available for all ages, from nursery up to college. When it comes to education, we must go beyond primary schools, which is where the majority of anti-litter education seems to take place. Now, I don't have children myself, but even I know that you can't say something once and expect it to stick. If we want a culture where cleanliness is valued, where my rubbish, my responsibility is the overriding mindset, then we need to focus on embedding this message into everything at all levels. Enforcement is another key issue that people talk about when it comes to litter, and I count myself fortunate to have become friends with Ray Jones, a litter enforcement warden in Devon. I have him to thank for introducing me to a few aspects of how enforcement powers can be extended, such as through the Community Safety Accreditation Scheme and Voluntary Code of Conduct for food on the go. This isn't just about handing out fines when littering is observed, but there are things that communities can use as part of the planning process to help mitigate fast food and takeaway rubbish. However, pardon the pun, there does need to be an appetite for this. So if you know local counselors who are interested in tackling litter beyond the photo op of a litter pick, this may be something to call their attention to. Now, we've just gone through a rapid gallop of a year's worth of material, and you may be feeling more confused than when you originally sat down. Sorry about that. However, I will consider my time here a success if you walk away today thinking that there's more within your power to try within your own community when it comes to tackling rubbish, especially when it comes to proactive prevention. I'm a big believer in looking upstream for solutions to stop problems before they occur, rather than the constant firefighting and reactive methods that tend to be used when it comes to litter. If this appeals to you as well, what are your next steps? Well, we should have a few minutes for questions now, and you're welcome to chat with me later if you see me around. The Off the Ground website has a lot of material you can explore, and I can also be reached via email. As I hope is pretty clear by now, I am always happy to talk rubbish, so please do get in touch.